Blists Hill Victorian town in Shropshire revives the sights, sounds and smells of the 19th century.
Good morning.
At its heart stands the pharmacy, a treasure house of potions and remedies from a century and a half ago. Now, in a unique experiment, Ruth Goodman, Nick Barber and Tom Quick are opening the doors to the Victorian pharmacy, recreating a high street institution we take for granted, but which was once a novel idea.
How can I help?
They'll bring the pharmacy to life, sourcing ingredients, mixing potions and dispensing cures. But in an age when skin creams contained arsenic and cold cures were made from opium, the team will need to be highly selective. They'll only make safe versions of traditional remedies and try them out on carefully selected customers.
The start was like the Wild West. People didn't know what was good and bad.
Try and get a bit of speed up. Oh, there we go, yeah.
The pharmacy was something that affected everybody's lives in one way or another.
They'll discover an age of social transformation that brought healthcare within the reach of ordinary people for the very first time, heralding a consumer revolution that reached far beyond medicine to create the model for the modern high street chemist as we know it today. The Victorian pharmacy opens its doors in 1837, the year when the teenage Queen Victoria ascended the throne.
Wow, look at this place. This is fantastic.
Ooh, that smell!
It's much bigger than I thought it would be.
There's a heck of a lot of stuff here, isn't there?
There's a tremendous amount of stuff.
Fresh from her time on the Victorian farm, Ruth Goodman will now be applying her skills in new areas, from medicines to cosmetics. As a domestic historian, she knows just how important the pharmacy was to ordinary people.
Doctors were expensive. Really, on a day-to-day basis, only the rich were using doctors. Occasionally, a poor person might be able to save up for a consultation. Maybe a doctor might offer some free consultation. But in general, most people in the 19th century turned to the pharmacist for the majority of their health care.
It's a beautiful place to be in. We're going to be able to make this work really well.
Nick Barber is Professor of the Practice of Pharmacy at the University of London's School of Pharmacy.
Parrot brand polishing soap and monkey brand. Things like Sloane's liniment, which people use nowadays, and Zambuck.
As the pharmacist, he will be responsible for recommending and preparing all the remedies and medicines that his shop dispenses. It's a unique opportunity for Nick to learn how his profession evolved.
It's a fantastic chance to recreate what it was like to be a Victorian pharmacist at a time when pharmacy was completely different to how it is today. Pharmacists were creating new things, lots of innovation happening then, the growth of chemistry through this period, and pharmacists were experimenting and developing new sorts of treatments as well. We're going to have fun with this.
I'm going to go see how this sign's getting on.
OK, see you in a minute. There's old pill-rolling devices here. Look at these liquids up here. This is a tincture of Zingib.
No Victorian pharmacy would be complete without an apprentice.
And these are all the Latin names that I'm going to have to know about. And
that job falls to Tom Quick. A PhD student in the history of medicine, he's hoping to put theory into practice.
All the drugs were the natural products were all in their Latin names as well.
oh, well, and so much equipment as well, right?
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Really, what I think of as history isn't about just seeing things behind glass cases. It's about people's lives and what people did on a day-to-day basis.
We've got all the kit here, which was all needed in those days. They've got
Got the balance there, right?
yeah, you'd be weighing things out
Fundamental
carefully.
to- yeah, right.
You know, careful being the key word, because you killed people if you got these things wrong. I mean, I'm just old enough that some of these things I was taught when I was an undergraduate, but I've never used them professionally. So actually, to do these sorts of things, to go back to mixing, to pounding, to compounding things is an enormous challenge.
The front of shop is where they will come face to face with the public. In the early Victorian age, new ideas on how to treat illness were beginning to filter through to the high street. But in this moment of change from traditional to scientific medicine, many of the cures the pharmacy will sell are based on old beliefs and remedies.
Poison of lance-headed viper. Oh, my goodness.
In 1837, despite the dangerous product on the shelves, anyone could trade as a pharmacist. Even grocers were setting up as chemists.
Look at that!
Wow. That looks so good. Well, it's just fantastic to see your name above a shop like that.
Yeah. You'd want a good standing within the community, wouldn't you, to be a pharmacist?
Yeah,
I think
sort of that.
It was a hub of the town, really, and people used to come here. Everybody's ill. Everybody comes to the pharmacy.
Opening a new shop was a massive investment, and pharmacists needed to be entrepreneurs to survive. Marketing was everything. Like many of their predecessors, the new Barber & Goodman pharmacy is having a grand opening. In order to understand how people responded to 19th century remedies, Barber & Goodman will dispense authentic but safe Victorian medicines to carefully chosen volunteers. The pharmacy's first customer is Sue Dodd, who's worked as a nurse for 35 years.
Hello, Mr. Barber.
Hello.
I have a very bad cough. Is there anything that you can help me?
Well, have you tried modern cures for a cold? Do you think they work?
Some do, although you can't beat natural local honey and lemon for sore throats and generally things like that.
Well, in Victorian times, what we'd have given you is Dr. John Collis Brown's chlorodyne. I've got a chlorodyne in here. It's invented when he was an Indian Army doctor for cholera. It didn't treat cholera, but it became a very popular treatment for coughs, colds, chests and things like this. Yes. It's got in chloroform, it's got opium in it, and it's got cannabis in it.
Why would they put those things in?
Well, it makes people feel better, as you might imagine.
Many pharmacists made up their own versions of chlorodyne, but the high opiate content made these medicines addictive, and death from overdose was a real risk. Collis Brown's mixture is still on sale today, but with a low, non-addictive dose of morphine.
Opium suppresses cough, so if people do have troublesome coughs, then it would help bring that down. What we'll do is we'll look out something for you which is a bit safer.
And will it have the opium and things like that in it?
No, we'll find one without those sorts of things. Just use some natural herbs we'll use for this one.
That sounds wonderful.
Before his customer returns for her authentic Victorian cough medicine, Nick will need to find a less risky recipe.
Balsam of horehound or horehound and aniseed here.
OK, great.
Try that, see what that looks like.
No problem. Balsam of horehound and aniseed.
That's it. The one? So what have we got in? Paregoric elixir, tincture of Senegal.
The chemist's Bible was the Pharmacopoeia, which listed all the remedies and potions of the day.
The one we can't use, definitely, is paregoric. Right. And paregoric is camphorated opium. It's a form of opium, so again we've got the morphine in. So what I think we need to do is take that balsam of horehound and aniseed and see whether we can reformulate it using current knowledge and using things which are a bit safer than some of the ingredients.
My goodness, it's gorgeous at this time of year, isn't it?
Nick's chosen remedy, balsam of horehound, was made up largely of natural herbs and flowers.
Cleavers, this is what we're after, yeah?
Perfect, exactly.
The job of sourcing the essential ingredients falls to Ruth and herbalist Eleanor Gallia. Eleanor is an expert in plant medicine. A Victorian pharmacist would have needed her knowledge of the natural world.
So why do we want cleavers in a cough medicine, then?
Because they're the most wonderful immune stimulant, and they're very cleansing for the body. With respiratory catarrh and conditions, the first thing you really need to do is encourage the phlegm away from the chest. So the body is very good at cleansing itself and draining itself.
A pharmacy needed to maintain a healthy stock of medicinal plants.
So do we need anything else as well as the cleavers while we're out?
Plantain.
Plantain, oh, that's really quite a common thing.
The surrounding countryside was a valuable and free resource.
They like to be stood on, planted into the ground.
While Ruth is gathering the ingredients for the cough medicine, at the back of the shop, Nick and Tom open up the pharmacy's laboratory.
Wow, look at this place. This is going to be amazing, isn't it?
The nerve centre of their business, this is where the pharmacist would experiment with new cures and manufacture drugs and potions.
It's halfway between an alchemist's cave and a kitchen and a storeroom and all sorts, really.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting space for me. This is a place where they probably changed the most dramatically over the time period we're looking at. Say, 1840s, 50s. This is kind of like a kitchen, right? When you look, you've got the kind of all these ingredients over here, these sort of herbal things, and you'd be here sort of at the bench making your latest kind of concoction for them to sell in the shop.
Sell to the lucky public out there.
But by the end of the century, this is kind of a place of chemical experimentation, right?
And we've even got a hammer for pounding the herbs. What I hope to learn is some of the techniques which Victorian pharmacists used to use, and manual skills which some of us have forgotten. I also hope to learn some of the different sorts of approaches which they had to medicine in those days.
The Industrial Revolution was at its height, and half the population of Britain lived in towns. Overcrowding, poor sanitation and grinding poverty left many people vulnerable to disease. Hundreds of thousands died in the crowded, sewage-ridden cities, but Victorians had only the haziest of ideas about what caused illness or how to treat it, and so they often fell back on traditional remedies. As Nick is about to discover, as he prepares a bruise medicine made from earthworms.
Well, I didn't think I'd be doing this when I was doing a Victorian remedy. Digging, rather bizarrely, for earthworms. Earthworms were part of an old remedy which was around before Victorian times, medieval times really, in which people would take the earthworm and they'd boil up earthworms with olive oil and some form of wine into oil of earthworms, which they put on bruises. Here's one. Another one to add to my haul. There must be easier ways to treat bruises than this.
Customers would often ask a pharmacist to make up favourite traditional remedies like this.
You can always say if people believe in things, then things do work. It's the power of belief on health is very great.
Oil of earthworm. Who'd have thought that that was a Victorian recipe? It's obviously something that has come from long before, an old idea, one of those things that has hung on into the early part of the Victorian medical experience.
In the proper recipe, we use real earthworms and boil them in oil, but in the interest of worm welfare, we're not going to do that. We're going to use these dried worms, exactly the same species, but which we've obtained. In pharmacy at this time, you took things which were whole and you had to break them up by physical force. I've always been quite fond of earthworms. Charles Darwin spent a lot of his life studying them. I think he'd be upset by this. I don't think the worms would have been any use at all in a bruise. I think probably it just came from the old days when people saw things that looked similar and related to them. So, for example, the skin of an earthworm, when you take it out of the soil, does look a bit like a bruise. They didn't understand what a bruise was, as we do now, of course. In those days, there wasn't much science around. So if things looked similar, that was probably good enough for most people. We can add some red wine. Seems rather a waste, but... It's now ready to heat up. We've got the stove lit over here. We'll put it on there. I'll bring them over here to cool and take these lucky ones back to the garden. There's a strong placebo effect with all sorts of treatments. You know, even modern days, we can get 20 to 30% effect size from a placebo treatment. And we know that if the doctor's very positive about it and says this will work, it's more effective than not. That's a nasty bruise. How did you get that?
Playing around with a tennis ball.
James Scott is a pharmacy student.
And has been common throughout history, and there's been lots of remedies for it. We're going to try the oil of earthworm.
How literally? Actual earthworms?
Literally earthworm.
Right,
mixed with olive oil and some red wine. We're just going to put that on the top. Now, we're going to leave that, and I think tomorrow you should try applying again, and probably morning and evening, and then we'll see how you do in a few days' time. Come back then.
OK. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Pharmacist's apprentice Tom is hard at work setting up the carboys.
So that's the iron oxide, I believe. I'm going to try and make a lovely purple colour so that we can... the idea would be to attract as many people in by sort of demonstrating your pharmaceutical skill in some way, basically. I think we'll just see what happens for the moment.
At a time when many customers couldn't read, these tall, colourful storage bottles were a clear sign that this was a chemist's shop.
Right, so very red. This is a washing soda. Mix them together. I mean, the mixture's slightly purple. Just have to see what happens.
Learning how to mix the chemicals precisely enough to produce a successful colour was a fundamental test of a young apprentice's skill.
Half purple, half red there. I don't want to mess up this. How can you trust a chemist who can't even make the colours that enable you to recognise them as a druggist, you know? I don't know what to do here. Yeah, so it's not working that well, is it?
Ah!
Lovely.
Am I looking at the right thing?
Yeah, Plantego lanceolata. That's the lanceolate plantain.
Ruth and Eleanor have found another wild plant, the common plantain, for Nick's cough cure.
Parallel ribs. So what's good about this for a cough medicine, then, plantain?
It's used in all sorts of allergies and irritations in the lungs. Once the lungs are irritated, then they become inflamed, and then they produce more mucus. So actually what plantain does is it soothes and tones the mucous membrane. The mucosa is incredibly important because it's where the oxygen that you breathe in dissolves from a gaseous form into a liquid form. And you can actually take it in a tea, you can use it in hay fever when you have that problem, the allergy problem. So it's a very useful plant to befriend.
So what about the more exotic ingredients, those things from foreign parts?
You'd buy those maybe down from London. Yeah.
So I suppose they're being gathered by herbalists in other parts of the world, really, aren't they, for sale?
Herbalists and collectors, and they still are.
Yeah.
They still are.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how at the beginning of the 19th century there's this sort of body of herbal knowledge. I mean, people like Boot, John Boot, you know...
And his son Jesse.
And his son Jesse, exactly. You know, the Boots, the chemists, the founders, they begin as a medical herbalist, a little medical herbalist shop selling botanicals in one form or another, inspired by all sorts of different people.
Because Jesse himself, Jesse Boot, John's son, was very interesting. He studied pharmacy in his spare time, and then they employed a chemist. And
the herbalist business was no longer making money. Moving into...
And the druggists were so big at the time, and they were very much about making money. And so it was in their interest not to be...
encouraging too much.
Well, not to be encouraging people to be using their own medicines and growing them.
The word drug derives from the Dutch droog for dried plant. Today, there are more than 7,000 medical compounds derived from plants. Tom is edging closer to a near-perfect colour.
It looks an all right colour now. All we need to do, really, is dilute it so hopefully a little bit of light comes through it. It's very thick, so I'm just going to go for it and pour this straight in, try not to make too much of a mess, and see what happens.
Having achieved a reasonable purple, Tom moves on to the yellow carboy. One explanation for the fixed colours of the carboys reveals an ancient theory that still influenced early Victorian medicine.
Yeah, that's about right, I think.
but each of the colours represented one of the 4 elements.
Job done.
Or humours that made up the body.
The 4 humours were black bile, blood, phlegm and yellow bile. And those really equated to things which could be seen coming out of the body, to put it basically. And this is how they understood the body. The body had too much of things inside it, and therefore things would come out when it had too much of that humour, so it could be kept in balance.
Belief in the 4 humours persisted well into the 19th century, and an excess of blood in particular was thought to be the cause of many illnesses. Bloodletting was big business, and a jar of healthy, voracious leeches was a real money spinner for the Victorian pharmacist.
Horrible looking things, aren't they, I think?
Carl Peters Bond runs a leech farm in South Wales.
What did they use them for in Victorian times?
Basically, where they used to cut people to remove blood, which is obviously very painful,
Right.
the leech can bite. It sort of cuts a little Y-shaped hole.
Oh, right.
So probably a leech this size would probably take about 8 mils, and you'd probably lose about 50 afterwards.
Right.
It's almost a luxury because it's painless.
Yes.
Fairly painless then.
And were they luxury items or were they everyday items?
Yeah, they were probably been a very expensive item, so you know, I would consider them a luxury.
Yeah. Go on then, let's see what they're like. Well, feels a bit like a slug.
Yeah.
Feels very leachish. So these would be picked out and they'd be put onto a patient. Whoop. Not too keen on getting stabbed by that end, I must admit. I'm a bit nervous about it, I have to say.
Carl's partner, Christopher Peters Bond, has bravely volunteered to befriend the leech.
Quite a bit smaller than the other leeches. These have basically been starved for almost 2 years, so their gut is completely empty of blood.
Just lay them on the skin.
Yep.
Oh, it's really arched its head, hasn't it?
Yes.
It's very different to, I know, just holding on my skin.
It's just tasting him out. Yeah, here he goes. He's sort of having a bit of a nibble.
I can feel it's like a little bee sting. Apart from that, no, it's next to nothing at all.
That's what they've evolved over millions of years to do. So they bite painlessly and remove the blood. So it's a natural pharmaceutical tool, really.
This is a really medieval site, isn't it? Like 2,000 years of history here. This great, long Western European tradition in bloodletting.
Here's one of its sisters that have...
What a contrast. One hungry leech, one leech 3/4 of the way through his dinner.
The leech injects an anticoagulant when it bites, and the wound can bleed for up to 10 hours after the leech has dropped off. Even modern first aid can do very little to stop the bleeding.
It'll just keep on going, but
Yeah,
it's about 50 mil or so.
It shows how potent the chemicals are in its saliva to really produce that effect for such a long period of time.
How do you feel after it?
I feel fine, to be honest with you. I don't really feel any different before.
Pleasant experience, you think?
It's certainly not as unpleasant as it looks, perhaps. It's
all a bit more straightforward than...
Yes. I'm surprised that certainly there's no pain at all or anything like that, so I completely can understand how someone might sit through several of these thinking that they're doing themselves some good.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly beats all the other bloodletting methods, doesn't it? It's so much better than being cut with knives or...
I certainly wouldn't... I don't think I would have volunteered for, for having a knife cut at me.
I hope you still feel as positive about it in 10 hours' time when you've changed the bandages 6 times.
After use, the leech goes back in the jar, and the bloody bandages are dried out, ready to use again. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that Victorians understood the dangers of cross-infection, so disease spread easily.
Right, next job.
All the ingredients for the balsam of horehound cough medicine have been brought to the lab, where herbalist Eleanor joins Nick.
So this is horehound, is it? Where
Yeah,
does
this is-
horehound live? Is it a big plant or a little plant?
It's a shrub. It's a kind of bluey green shrub.
She's soaked the herbs in alcohol.
Now, in your original recipe, you had syrup of squill.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure you're familiar with squill.
Yes. Yes, can be rather toxic, but very old medicine.
A member of the lily family, squill, has been used for centuries to loosen mucus from the lungs.
So another tincture that we've got is cleavers. This is a really common herb, as Ruth and I discovered. Plantain, this is an interesting one. Again, a very common herb. And then the final herb we've got is the elecampane. Huge, tall, yellow, golden flower, a bit like a sunflower, but with enormous leaves. So that is our preparation, ready to go. A couple of teaspoons of treacle.
Hence a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Absolutely. Slow job of stirring this in. The more patience that you can work with, well, like cooking, the better. So that's lovely. That's lovely.
Ready to bottle it now?
Yes.
Early pharmacists put art and skill into the medicines they created.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
But in order to make a profit, it was essential that the customer was satisfied, and that word got out to the local community that here was a medicine that could be trusted.
It smells fantastic, I have to say. Have a smell?
Oh, it smells quite nice.
It's half a teaspoon, 3 times a day in a glass of water. See how it is.
It's very, very strong. Oh, yes. It's clearing something.
Here's the bottle. We'd like you to give that a try. Come back in a few days and we'll see how you feel.
I'll let you know.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To celebrate their first week in business, Barbara and Goodman are holding an open evening, a chance to catch up on how their customers are doing.
I'm still got the bruise, unfortunately.
Still got the bruise.
Yeah.
Let's have a look then. Let's see how it went.
We've gone shades of yellow in the middle.
It's changing like they do. I would say those remedies have had no effect whatsoever. What do you think?
I'll be tempted to agree.
Yeah. I found this, seeing how the Victorians approached pharmacy, fascinating. There's a spirit and adventure and entrepreneurism there.
I can actually say, yes, it has helped a lot.
And has it eased your breathing?
It's much better. Before, as I breathed out, it was very crackly, it was very difficult, a typical asthmatic type feeling, and it has helped. I can feel as though I breathe normally again for the first time in more than 3 weeks.
By the end of the 1840s, scientific advances were beginning to filter down to the high street pharmacist. Old ideas of bloodletting and purging gave way to exciting new techniques and cures. And pharmacists would spearhead a whole new range of consumer experiences.
Nipple shields. Blood and stomach pills, wow.